Hello and welcome to your Broker Room podcast. I'm your host for the day, Glenn Mitchell. I'm the head of commercial and equipment finance for the YBR Group. Well, today I'm joined by Annie Kane. I'm quite nervous, an industry icon and certainly fantastic in her field of work. And we're going to hear Annie's story today, which I'm looking forward to, being on the other side of the microphone rather than Annie interviewing someone like myself. So Annie's the managing editor of The Advisor and host of many podcasts. I listen to lots of the podcasts. Actually, I really enjoy them, Annie. And today is special, and we all have an opportunity to hear more of Annie's story. So let's start with, before the advisor comes into play, Annie, tell us about, education and also what your interests were when you were going through your schooling. Where did you have visions of finishing up?
Ancient history. We're going back in time. Thank you, Glenn, for having me on your podcast. Yeah, it's weird being on this side of the microphone and not asking the questions or answering them. So for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Annie Kane. I'm the managing editor of The Advisor. I came to Australia 9 years ago, and we'll probably talk about my sort of journey through that beforehand. But educated in the UK. I went to university in the UK. I studied English literature and music because I thought I was going to be a music journalist. So that was why I studied that. And I did do music journalism when I first sort of started, but I graduated into the GFC, Global Financial Crisis. And so a lot of my plans, the best laid plans of mice and men, I think, in 2018 kind of fell through. So a lot of the grad schemes that I had hoped to get onto were no longer being offered. Obviously, the GFC hit in the UK pretty hard. And I had to really sort of rethink what I was doing. So I spent a couple of years freelancing and kind of finding my feet. And I did freelance for BBC Music. So it's a magazine about classical music. And that's really what I wanted to do. So I was interviewing loads of musicians and going to the proms and going to festivals and stuff. And then after a while, I decided that, I wanted to kind of do something where I was getting my teeth into the subject matter a little bit more. And with music journalism, it's really competitive. There's so many people obviously wanting to do it because it's super fun. And I learned a lot, but I really kind of wanted to keep going and keep learning new things. And so I started looking at business to business journalism, which is where I moved into. So after classical music, I did a couple of stints freelancing for some magazines. I wrote for some really sort of big household names, different areas of interest. So things like beauty, which was really fun. I got to test loads of skincare and write about that. I did film reviews. And then I moved into the sustainability world. So wrote a lot about sustainability for a few years. And then when I moved up to Australia 9 years ago, and I was finding my feet here, I was freelancing for The Guardian, writing about sustainability, and then came across this wonderful world of broking. And really, the rest is history. I've been writing about broking now for 8 and a bit years.
Interesting enough, you'd say GFC, Annie, because I still remember I was working with Challenger Funds Management. And of course, when the GFC hit, we had a mortgage fund where everyone wanted their money out. So it wasn't like the bank where you could access the funding, and we had restricted funding, but because it was obviously the money was lent out to mortgages in those days. And I thought to myself, well, that's the end of my career. I'll have to perhaps be a garbo or a painter or a carpenter or whatever industry I was going to enter. And then along came aggregation world, where Challenger had bought Plan, Choice and Fast. And I was fortunate enough to be given the role to head up commercial and equipment finance for Plan Australia. And I think that's when I first met yourself, where that was exploding. Broker world was starting to really take off. And I had no idea what was in front of us, but it was enjoying seeing the growth pattern. So you came in, so what are we talking, 2014, 2015?
2015, I came to Australia, and 2016 started writing for The Advisor.
Wow.
Yeah.
And now I look at, we go to the functions and the awards that you've done an absolutely fantastic job in hosting. It just gets bigger and bigger. Do you sit back and think to yourself, I had no idea it'd get to the numbers and the explosion of new lenders and brokers coming into the industry, of how much you were going to walk across their areas of expertise?
I think it's, my friends and family still think it's so funny that I write about mortgages because I was terrible at maths in school. And I think when I think about now how wonderfully warm this industry's been for the Advisor brand. And of course, it's not my brand, it's part of Momentum Media, and Alex Whitlock and Phil Tarrant, the two directors, have done an amazing job setting up the Advisor brand and doing all those events and making really getting really deeply embedded in the industry. So I think that's been phenomenal. But yeah, it's great to see how much, even over the last 8 years, how much the broking industry has grown. So if I think about the stories that I started writing when I first joined, it was a lot about aggregation. So what was happening with Plan, Choice and Fast. Then we had all of those millions of reviews into broker remuneration. So we had the Cedric review. Then we had the asset remuneration review. So a lot of my focus in the first couple of years was really looking at, well, how are brokers paid and what does this mean? There was a lot of work going on around that. And then, of course, the Royal Commission after that. So there's no shortage of things to write about. But yeah, it's been such a privilege and an honor to be able to talk to so many amazing people in the industry, whether it's on our podcast, the Elite Broker and New Broker podcast, or if it's for the magazine or for the news. I think everyone's been so generous with their time, which we really appreciate.
The explosion, well, I just spoke to Damien Mantini from Platform Finance, the explosion of new funding institutions in Australia has just been amazing, hasn't it, Annie? Like, that's one thing that I said before, getting access to money for small businesses within 24 hours, you'd think that I'd need to go to a psychiatrist if you had told someone that you could get money the same day, but that's alive and well.
Yeah, commercial finance is really booming at the moment. And I think, whether it's from non-bank lenders and so many more private lenders as well popping up, lots of people really interested in looking at peer-to-peer lending. But yeah, I think even from the broking industry, seeing many more brokers now thinking about becoming specialized commercial brokers, which I think it used to be so much, I think, where you started off like that and you kind of just did that. Whereas now I think we're seeing mortgage brokers become specialized commercial brokers, and not just diversifying, but actually moving to be straight commercial. So that's a new trend that I don't think we would have seen maybe 4 or 5 years ago in the same amount of numbers as we are seeing now.
And of course, at the moment, the headache for this industry confronting us, as we all know, is payroll tax. And I thought, here comes another curveball. If we hadn't been through enough with Royal Commission, payroll tax, thoughts?
Yes. I mean, the beauty of our job is that we get to read all of these things and try and provide sort of truncated cliff notes, I suppose, of what's been happening. So yeah, I've been reading a lot about relevant contract law at the moment and talking to a lot of lawyers about what it means and trying to really obviously make sure that we're talking about it in a way that's hopefully digestible for people, but also makes sense for how it's sort of coming through. But it is really interesting looking at the payroll tax situation and, what the different states will do with it. Recently the New South Wales Legislative Council said they'd be holding an inquiry looking at the relevant contract provisions and whether that's actually adequate. And we do know that in the loan market case, for example, the judge said he thought it was a really harsh reading of the laws. So, hopefully if New South Wales does change the way that it looks at relevant contracts for broking, then that could have a really great benefit for the rest of the industry, because currently the position is you have to pay payroll tax. And of course, aggregators are working to figure out how on earth we're going to be doing this because that's expensive. And then, at the moment, moving forward, it's you're paying payroll tax, but you can challenge it if you don't think it's applicable, which is what we've seen with loan market in Finshaw recently. So yeah, I think it would be difficult. The interesting thing will be, well, what are the ramifications of the new tax burden? I mean, either obviously it will be you take a pay cut because you're having to put something towards payroll tax with your commissions, or you look at hiring more staff, which I think will probably be the more likely scenario. And so many brokers currently are finding it very difficult to be a sole broker without any support. So I think we'll really just see that if it does continue through and it does filter through that we have to pay payroll tax, I think we'll just see really the slow demise of already a fast demise of sole trader brokers. They'll have to start employing people.
Let's certainly hope common sense prevails through government, and we'll watch this space. So no doubt that you'll keep all people informed through your fantastic podcasts that you do. Do you do those weekly or do you do those monthly now?
Oh, so Elite Broker is weekly. I probably record about 5 a week now, I'd say. So yeah, Elite Broker is weekly, New Broker is monthly, In Focus is monthly. Then we have the Odd Women in Finance podcasts. We do What's Making Headlines, which is weekly, which is the weekly wrap up of the news. Yes, I do a lot now. But if you want to listen to them, they're on the Advisor Podcast Network. Little plug there, shameless. But there's so many. There's probably about 8 years worth. So
it's important to promote yourself, because those that are listening to this at the moment, Annie, what you do for the industry. So what's your reach out point of how many people you've got as members?
For the Advisor?
Yes.
Yeah. So we rolled in a membership subscription. It must have been either last year or 2022. We probably have about 600 premium members now. So that's people who are paying for the magazine and for the discounts to the events and things. But the listens are going through the roof for the podcast. I mean, we've been doing it for about 8 years. I think I recorded my 1,000th episode the other day. So I've talked to a lot of brokers and a lot of amazing like YBR brokers and VAL brokers over the past few years as well. You know, I know that some of them that, you know, really some of the big names like Susie McDonald and Effie Nicole I've spoken to before on the podcast, and they're always so generous with their time. And I think having access to so many great brokers has been really wonderful. And because there's a huge back catalogue, our listens go up, obviously, really quickly over the years. So we've got we passed 750,000 downloads, I think, this year, which is amazing. And yeah, it's really fantastic to see how many people listen to the podcast. I love as well, I met people's one of our listeners' kids the other day, and they were so sweet because they listened to it in the car with their children on the school run. So they were like, I know your voice, I love the podcast. And I was like, this is not really my target audience, but I love that that's, you know, going into like, you know, people's cars with them into their commute. I think that's a privilege and really fun to be able to share stories with amazing elite brokers.
And as an advocate, which you've done a fantastic job on, Annie, I must applaud you for Women in Finance, which is, it's really important, because it was interesting. One day I went to a lender lunch where there was about 30 people there, and I think we had one lady on the commercial side of our business that was invited, and I thought it must have been very overwhelming for her. We needed to do more to encourage more ladies to play in that space, and I think you've done a great job. So you might want to talk a little bit of the growth projection of what's happened with women in business.
Yeah, so we started the Women in Finance Awards, it must be 7 or 8 years ago, and that was really because, especially in financial planning, women really minority, and we were seeing trends where women were actually leaving the industry. And of course, that really accelerated over COVID when so many people, predominantly women who were the primary caregiver, left the industry because they had to look after their kids with homeschooling, or they had to, you know, like with the, might have elderly parents. We saw a lot of people leave the industry over 2020, 2021, not just in broking, but in across the financial services industry. And then following that, we were getting a lot of feedback from the former winners of the Women in Finance Awards being like, it's amazing to have these people in the room and to celebrate with them and to see what they're doing, but we want to know more, and we want to find out how we can be better business leaders, how we can learn from other people in financial services about what they're doing, especially because they might be referral partners. Yep. So we started the summit, the Women in Finance Summit, 2 years ago. And we just had it recently on the 15th of November in Sydney. And it was, I mean, obviously I'm going to be biased, but I think it was amazing. But I think what's really palpable from the summit is the connection and support in the room. You know, people are really connecting. A lot of women might feel like they don't have the confidence to become a senior leader, or they don't feel like they want to put themselves out there. And really a lot of the sessions that we were doing at the Women in Finance Summit were being like, well, how can you build your confidence? How can you get to a senior leadership position and really showcase and amplify what you're doing? Because of course there are amazing women in this industry, but they're still a minority. Like 25% of people in the broking industry are women, about 20% in financial planning are women. And really looking at, you know, not only saying, look at the fantastic people who are in this industry, but also putting them on a pedestal and saying, why don't you think about joining this industry? Having the next generation of women coming through and choosing broking or choosing financial planning and choosing finance as a career choice. So that's really what we aim to do with the events. And it's fantastic. And of course, it's open to men as well. Like we're not saying you can't come if you're a man, but it's predominantly their main goal is to really accelerate more female senior leaders in finance.
No, absolutely, totally agree there. And we've been advocates within our business at YBR Group. I know Violetta and Susie McDonald and Iffy Nickel have been putting their hand up to make sure that they promote it as best they possibly can. I always get told what a great industry I work in, and sometimes I do take it for granted, but recently around the dinner table, they said every time we talk to you, you're on a conference or, a sporting event or whatever with our lender partners. But I do really think that I'm blessed, and I'm sure you must think the same, Annie, because it is a great industry. When you walk into the room where you have 700 or 800 people, you must pinch yourself and think, gee whiz, I never thought from the day that I started in 2015 with the advisor that it's grown to the extent that it has today with really nice people.
Yeah, such lovely people. And I think you're totally right. And I agree with you there, Glenn. Like, the industry is so warm and welcoming. And as a journalist, like, it can be hard, breaking into an industry and gaining that trust for business to business publications. Like, you need to have your ear on the ground. You need to have your contacts. You need to be able to push when you need to push, but also to find the stories, because, there's not that many people who are that interested in what's happening in mortgage and finance broking, but we love it. Yeah. And I think we've been so blessed with the collegiality of the industry and how willing people are to share. Like, for our Elite Broker podcast, for example, people are so open and honest about what they've done, what they like to share with other people, advice for new people coming through. And I think that's amazing. Like, it's very rare that you'd see people in an industry provide that level of support to people who are, in effect, their competitors.
Well, I totally agree with that, Annie, because I find my best friends are my competitors, where I can pick up the telephone where I've got a concern about a certain issue, and they've got the same concern, and that will share it with us and try and map out together and get. And I look at the forums, the MFAA, the FBAA, CAFPA, they bring good people together to give up their time to generally show concern for our industry and potential issues that might be in our industry. Put 5 years ahead, where do you think the industry will be in 5 years, Annie? Do you think it's going to continue to grow, plateau? What's your prediction?
Of course, I think it's going to grow. I reckon, 80% should be achievable. I'm not sure how much further after that we'll get, and particularly because it's an interesting time. We've got this like huge intergenerational wealth change coming through the traps at the moment. Baby boomers are retiring, or in some cases, we've got people passing away, and therefore we've got this handover of money coming through. So that might be interesting, because it will be like, well, what does that mean if suddenly quite a large proportion of people have a huge amount of cash? And we did see some stats recently that showed us that about a quarter of all property transactions in the Eastern Seaboard are being paid for in cash at the moment, which surprised me. I thought that was high, especially given how expensive property is in the Eastern Seaboard. But with more and more people gaining this inheritance from the older generation, from the boomers, I think we'll see more and more people actually looking at buying in cash. So I think that will be one of the challenges that brokers might need to work against, is being like, well, how do I find new business?
Yep.
If this older cohort, let's say 40-year-old plus, are suddenly coming into a lot of wealth and they're just buying stuff with cash. So that will be something to think about. First home buyers, though, that activity I think will continue to increase. We just saw the Help to Buy scheme come through, so that might help as well, seeing more people look at finding advice. But I think there'll be a lot more people looking at how they're generating wealth and coming to brokers for that.
Is the industry doing enough to encourage younger people to join this as a profession?
I think the association's doing an amazing job, whether it's through national campaigns or through championing what brokers are doing. They do an incredible job. And of course, they're super busy all the time, also fighting for brokers, which is amazing to see. I think what I'd love to see is more brokers going into like schools maybe and talking about what they do. And I know that some brokers already do this, but I think so many people come into the broking industry and love it. And I think a lot of the time, the things that we hear are people saying, I wish I'd known about it earlier. I just didn't know it was an option. I didn't know what it looked like. And, we were talking about women in finance. And one of the key things about broking is if you're working on commission, there's no gender pay gap. So that's an amazing calling card for people as well who might be thinking about a career in broking. I think we could do more, like individually, but I think as an industry, we do a pretty good job already. Of course, there's always more work to be done, but I hope that people can see what's going on, the amazing work the brokers are doing, how, the increasing market share is really testament to that. And hopefully we gain more people in the industry, because I think, with population growing, we need more brokers.
Annie, on that closing note, thank you for your continued support to our industry. I'm sure I'll speak on behalf of everyone associated with our great industry. You do a great job. So thanks very much. I've enjoyed speaking to you today.
Oh, I enjoyed speaking to you too, Glenn. Thanks so much for having me and being on this side of on the microphone. But I really appreciate your time and your support. And thank you to everyone listening for sharing your stories with us. Of course, if you want to find out more about what we're doing, feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to hear your story.
There we go. Thanks very much.